Hey everyone, Tin Man here with a guide to one of the best builds in Dota Underlords right now, 6 Mages. Crystal Maiden, one of the key units in the build, was nerfed slightly in the patch yesterday, reducing her mana generation at 1 and 2 stars, but despite this, Mages on the whole are still very strong and capable of winning in high-ranking lobbies. In this guide, I will cover the pros and cons of Mages, a general game plan, unit and item choices, and positioning considerations and examples. So let's get right to it. First off, the pros and cons of Mages. One of the biggest draws of Mages is their extremely strong late game. By the time you get to the late game with 9 and 10 units, Mages are just able to dish out so much magic damage that almost every other build will struggle to compete with them. They're also very strong against a very popular build right now in the meta that focuses around warriors and warlocks, which focus on armor and sustained healing, which Mages' burst magic damage can cut right through. Mages are also not nearly as reliant on getting units to 3 stars, such as assassins, hunters, and knights are often reliant on. They can do most of their damage with 1 and 2 star units. They're also very flexible. You don't need to always go into 6 mages. Sometimes 3 mage strategies are also viable as well. On the downside though, mages are often very contested, with most lobbies in the highest ranks often have 2 and 3 mage players in them. It's also very reliant on getting the Mage Ace, Lich, who not only does a lot of damage, but his Mage Ace effect also adds to mana generation. Also, if you do go for the full 6 mage build, they often have very little flexibility since you need to be playing 6 mages. That leaves you with very little room for CC effects or other flexible choices. The general game plan: in the early game, you're going to want to pick up units like Ogre Magi, Tiny, Razor, Morphling, and Queen of Pain. These will give you a good early frontline, as well as giving you some magic damage to back it up. You don't want to worry too much about early losing streaks, since mages will become very strong later in the game. Just use the early losing streaks to save up your gold, and don't try to level too aggressively. You want to be saving for interest because your big power is going to come in the mid to late game. By the time you get to the mid game, you're going to want to play 3 mages along with some other magic damage dealers, such as the Morphling and Queen of Pain from earlier. By adding in the 3 mages, you will dramatically increase the damage output of those units. By the time you get to the later game, you're going to want to transition to 6 mages, generally around levels 8 or 9, generally when you find Lich, who's going to be the key unit to signal the transition into 6 mages. By that point, you want to complete the build with units like Morphling, Dragon Knight, Gyrocopter, or some other magic damage dealers that we'll discuss in a moment. So the mage units that you want to play: you will always want to be playing Crystal Maiden, Lich, Puck, and Keeper of the Light. Crystal Maiden provides the mana that oils the entire engine. Without Crystal Maiden, your units will just cast way too slowly, and your opponent will already have overrun you before you're getting your wave of spells off. Lich is the Mage Ace and is the most powerful mage, dealing a lot of damage and increasing the mana generation as well, in addition to Crystal Maiden. Puck and Keeper of the Light are the 2 big AoE mages. Puck has a very low mana cost and a very low cooldown, allowing it to spam out multiple casts over time, whereas Keeper of Light has one big channel that requires a lot of mana to cast, but also deals a ton of damage. You almost always want to play Lina. Her ability is not quite as good. It is single target focused, which means it has less total damage, but she does provide the very useful Human Alliance, which, since you already have humans with Crystal Maiden and Keeper of the Light, that means you're very close to completing the Human Alliance, which is a reasonable defensive ability in this build. You'll only sometimes want to play Ogre Magi and Razor. Of course, you need 6 mages, so you will have to play one of them at any given build at 6 mages. But generally, you're going to want to stick with Razor if you need more damage, and Ogre Magi if you need more frontline. Both of those units are very good in the early game though, so don't be afraid to pick them up early and play them, but you're going to want to replace one of them with Lich by the time you get to the late game. The support units, the other options that you have, I already discussed Morphling and Queen of Pain earlier. These are early assassins that have magic damage abilities that's also AoE effects, so they deal lots of damage early on. Nature's Prophet was recently changed in the patch just yesterday. He previously summoned a Treant, which was completely worthless for a mage build, but his new ability is a pretty big magic damage burst to the opponent's board. It deals 250 damage at one star, and then it bounces between different targets, dealing magic damage with each bounce. It's kind of like a Chain Frost effect, but it's on a very cheap unit, a very early game unit, and one that's very easy to level up. So Nature's Prophet is definitely a competitor, along with Morphling, Queen of Pain, for kind of this early game magic damage burst. Viper and Dragon Knight are two good dragons that pair well with Puck, one of your key mages. And these are a little bit harder to get up to 2-star, certainly in the early game. But they're very good options in the late game, especially if you get Viper to 3-star. He's one of the best tanks in the game because of his corrosive skin, granting him an attack speed slow against attackers and also giving him magic resistance. Dragon Knight just deals lots of auto attack damage and also has a Breath of Fire that's a good magic AoE. Dragon Knight's just a great late game piece, but of course very expensive and hard to level up. There are some other options outside of those 5. Shadow Fiend and Kunkka were former staples in these mage builds. They were very popular, but they've since been nerfed a little bit. Shadow Fiend had his radius on his ability nerfed, and Kunkka just lost damage from his ultimate. They are both reasonable options, especially if you manage to get them leveled up early. Say you get a pair of Shadow Fiends and then you complete it to 2-star. Don't be afraid to play Shadow Fiend. He's still good, but he kind of falls off in the later game compared to some other options. On the other hand, Disruptor and Gyrocopter are very strong damage abilities, but they're both aces, making them very hard to find and very hard to level up, and they kind of provide just worthless alliances. The Brawny, Warlock, Deadeye, and Inventor alliances are just not relevant in this build. You are pretty much not going to use those anywhere else. So use them if you find them, maybe get them upgraded, but don't be afraid to cut them if you need other alliances. Items. The item choices in this build is pretty straightforward. You want to be casting spells, which means you need mana, so Arcane Boots and Brute for the Aggressor are great options for that. Arcane Boots is particularly great on Puck, because Puck has a lower max mana, only 60 max mana, so putting it on there means that Puck will reach 50% mana faster and give the mana to everybody right nearby. Brute for the Aggressor, also great on Puck to ensure multiple casts, and also good on Keeper of Light to get him up to that 150 mana quickly. Helm of the Undying is kind of an odd item in this build, but it's actually quite good on Keeper of the Light. Keeper of Light requires lots of mana, as we've discussed before, and by putting him back in the corner, which he typically is, he can struggle to gain the mana on his own. So what you can do is you can put him right up in the front line with the Helm of the Undying, let him tank opposing damage, which will kill him off, but will also get him a lot of mana, and then while he's in that 4-second Undying state, he can channel his ult and cast it for lots of damage. Octarine Essence and Refresher Orb just allow you to cast more quickly. Generally, those are going to be really good on something like Morphling or Lich, who have big, impactful abilities on kind of medium-length cooldowns that you want to be able to cast multiple times in a row. One important note is that you probably want to avoid the Fall from Grace item. This says that your human units will count as Heartless when counting alliances. They won't count as human anymore. And the Heartless Alliance is great, but not really for mages, because mages, the vast majority of your damage is going to come from abilities, which deal magic damage. And the Heartless bonus reduces the opponent's armor, which only protects them from physical damage. So your physical damage is going to be slightly increased, but that's not a whole lot of your damage. Most of your damage comes from magic. So you would much rather retain the human bonus, allowing you to silence opponents and prevent them from casting, just so that you can get your spells off first. So let's talk about positioning. Here in the early game, I've got a pretty typical early game with a 2-star Tiny, along with some of the other units, Queen of Pain, Morphling, and Razor. You'll generally want to be slightly offset to the side, so that the tankiest unit, assuming your opponents are roughly evenly spread out, so that your tankiest unit is towards the middle, and that way most of their attacks will be funneled onto your Tiny rather than onto your Morphling or your Queen of Pain. Once you get to a couple more units, and you say get 3 mages in there, you want to put a unit like Puck back in the corner, because Puck has a straight line ability, and I've discussed this in my previous positioning videos, so make sure you check those out if you haven't. But basically, whenever you have a straight line ability in the corner, you're going to hit on average more opponents than if you put them somewhere closer to the middle. We also see that there are other types of frontliners that you can use rather than just Tiny, Morphling, and Razor. You can use Scrappies, which pair particularly well with mages because most of them have pretty low cooldowns on their abilities, meaning that they're very mana hungry. And they also often deal magic damage, such as with Clockwork and Tinker, making them great pairings with mages. They tend to fall off into the later game, and you can't really play Scrappies with 6 mages, but they're fairly good in the early game. Here's another example where we have Morphling and Viper up on the front line. And I know these are assassin units, so your instinct may be to put them in the back so that they can jump to the opponents, but they're actually quite resilient. And once they get leveled up, they're some of the best tanks in the game. You put them up front, They're going to take the initial attacks, and then they're going to be able to use their abilities right off the bat. Morphling will dash to safety, whereas Viper will seriously disable one target, as well as spread his corrosive skin if you have the Dragon Alliance. But the other assassin, such as Queen of Pain, is often placed just behind the front line. This is to ensure that her ability hits the most enemies possible, because she hits in an area around her. You don't want her jumping to a back corner and maybe only hitting one person who's back in the corner. You want to hit the whole front line that is kind of engaging your units. By the time you get to the late game and you want to transition to 6 mages, the standard formation here is this kind of box formation in either the left or right corner. This allows your straight line units, such as Puck and Keeper of the Light, to cast their abilities most optimally, while also protect your more vulnerable units, such as Dragon Knight and Lich. Your frontliners here are still going to be Morphling. Razor is a good option for frontline, as well as somebody like Lena, who's really just there for one quick cast, and then if she dies off, that's no problem. Also, you want to, if you get the upgraded assassins up to 3-star, you can move them a little bit more aggressively forward, as we see here with Viper and Morphling. However, this will ensure that most of your opponent's fire will concentrate on those units first. And if your opponent has mostly magical damage composition, such as you're up against another mage player, you may want to put Viper closer to the back so that he does not take those initial auto attacks, because that's the only way he's going to die with very high magic resistance against those magic damage compositions. So against opposing mages, you generally want Viper in the back rather than in the front. And once again, reiterating that Keeper of Light and Puck always want to be near the corner, as well as Dragon Knight closer to the corner as well, to maximize their abilities' geometry. If your opponent has a lot of AoE effects, say like Disruptor or Kunkka, you're going to want to be very spread out, because otherwise your entire team is going to get caught in that ability and you'll be silenced or stunned and won't be able to get your abilities off. By spreading out like this, you maximize the chance that the opposing abilities are going to, say, target the Gyrocopter in the left corner, leaving your Keeper of the Light untouched, or they might target the Ogre Magi in the upper left and leave all of your mages available. So in conclusion, mages are really good in the current meta. I know they were slightly nerfed with the Crystal Maiden change, but that does not change the fact that they are still very strong. And they even got a new addition. Nature's Prophet is now a good magic damage dealer that you might want to give a try. It is very flexible build paths. I mainly covered the 6 mages build here, but there's often 3 mage builds along with, say, Scrappies or Assassins as well that are very viable as well. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe and turn on those notifications. And I want to give a special thanks to my Patreon supporters and Twitch supporters. Thank you so much. And you can support me on there at patreon.com/tinman354. And also check me out on Twitch, link in the description below. Really do appreciate it, and I'll see you next time.